When I opened my eyes, I saw sky. And not like the morning light coming through the orange interior of my tent, but like bright, open, blue sky. I was not in my tent anymore. I wasn't even in my sleeping bag. Everything was gone. Every single thing that we'd brought with us was gone. It was as if we just woken up and the last 2 days had been some kind of fever dream.
North Carolina is a place rich in history and folklore, a place where the past and the present intertwine in ways that frequently defy explanation. It's where the whispers of long-dead pirates mingle with the cries of unearthly beasts, and ghost ships sail turbulent seas. A place where the unexplained is an everyday occurrence. Welcome to First in Fright, the podcast where we uncover eerie legends and ghostly encounters and supernatural phenomena that make North Carolina the spookiest, most haunted, and paranormal place in America. I'm your host, Cooper Thornton, and for the next 8 episodes, we will hear stories from the Tar Heel State passed down through generations that continue to baffle and amaze to this day. Because in North Carolina, the past is never truly dead. There are places in North Carolina where the ground has mysterious circular depressions, almost like mini crop circles. And nothing has ever grown inside them, even though they are located near the forest. They all remain unchanged since they first appeared. This is usually explained away as being some sort of natural phenomena, but the truth is, nobody knows how they came to be. Some believe these marks in the ground were created by the devil himself. This is Episode 1, Unexplained Phenomena. We're going to take a look at one of the Tar Heel State's most infamous barren circles that is so cursed, it has inspired 2 horror novels and a feature film. But first, let's start with a short tale about a small North Carolina town's brush with the devil. The town of Bath, located on the Pamlico River southeast of Greenville, was once North Carolina's first provisional capital. It didn't hold the honor long and has never been home to more than a few hundred people. But today, it's perhaps best known for a series of small, saucer-shaped depressions in a forested area near town. Local lore has it that one Sunday morning sometime in the 1800s, a resident named Jesse Elliott chose to race his horse along Main Street rather than attend church with the rest of his community. Jesse was a known gambler and drunk in town, and he's said to have yelled, "Take me in a winner or take me to hell," to anyone willing to take him on. A dark stranger riding a dark horse suddenly appeared and agreed to race Jesse. At first, Jesse and his steed held their own, keeping ahead of the mysterious challenger. But then suddenly, Jesse's horse stumbled and its rider was flung to the ground. The impact broke Jesse's neck, killing him instantly. Some in the congregation privately thought the scoundrel got what he deserved, and their disapproval over his unholy ways was soon confirmed by some very disturbing evidence. Everywhere the hooves of the stranger's horse had struck the ground left blackened depressions. Until this day, no vegetation grows in the indentations, and through heavy rains and muddy winters, they continue to remain untouched. The stranger, some claim, was none other than the devil himself. But the devil didn't leave his mark in just one place. In the forested heart of North Carolina, there is a near-perfect 40-foot in diameter circle of earth known as the Devil's Tramping Ground. It's a place where, according to legend, the Prince of Darkness himself appears each night to plot his diabolical deeds. His incessant pacing has so scorched the soil that it is forever barren and lifeless. Locals claim that any objects left in the circle overnight will vanish or be thrown out by the time the sun rises the next morning. This landmark continues to scare visitors to this day. Here's a composite of accounts told by a local storyteller that will leave you with shivers up your spine.
My name is Abby Tinsdale. I'm currently doing a veterinary internship at a boutique clinic in Chapel Hill. So like a lot of people, I didn't really grow up believing in like ghosts or devils or anything like that. I don't know, it just wasn't ever something that I bought into, even though a lot of people in my family did. I don't know, I thought it was a lot more likely that people just misinterpreted something that they experienced, or I don't know, like chose to see something that they wanted to see. Like, I'd only believe in something like that if I experienced it myself. Actually, when it came to anything paranormal, I guess I'd identify more as like a skeptic or an unbeliever. But that was all before I visited the Devil's Tramping Ground. Okay, so about 5 years ago, I was an undergrad in my junior year at North Carolina State University in Raleigh. Go Pack. I had a tight-knit group of friends. You know, we all met freshman year, and then we stayed really close after that. And so most people in our group were from the South. Actually, I think all of us were from either North or South Carolina, except for this one guy, Preston, who was from Amherst, Massachusetts. Definitely not the South. So Preston had been researching something for his Mysteries and Misconceptions About the Past history class. I can't believe that I remember that name. Anyway, so Preston came across the Devil's Tramping Ground while writing a paper, and he became obsessed by the idea that there was this like supposed portal to hell right here in North Carolina. And when he found out how close it was to campus, he insisted that we all take this like weekend camping trip to go check it out. And we'd all heard about the tramping ground, but none of us had ever been. I certainly didn't believe the tall tales, but I was also not one to turn down a chance to get off campus for a weekend. So yeah, we allowed Preston to talk us all into going on a camping trip. Well, actually, not all of us. I remember my friend Grace refused right off the bat. Preston tried to give her crap about it and insisted that she was just scared, but Grace refused to budge. She said that we shouldn't mess around with things beyond our comprehension. I really wish that we'd listened to her. Drew had an old classic 99 Suburban. That thing was ancient, but also gigantic. Adelaide was complaining because Preston made us make room for this house plant. I don't know, it was like some stupid spider plant, but he refused to tell anyone why he brought it. He just said that it was a surprise for later. On the way to Bear Creek, Preston would not stop telling us stories about the tramping ground. Like there was this one legend that there were these two rival indigenous tribes who, I don't know, they had like some great battle and there was so much blood spilled on the ground that nothing would ever grow there again. And then there were people who said that the circle was actually what was left after a UFO landing. And like the UFO engines literally just irradiated everything underneath it. People have tried to spend the night in the circle, Preston would tell us, but anyone who's done so would just come out insane. I mean, he was always pulling that kind of crap. It was all just so ridiculous, but it helped pass the time. We stopped at this diner for lunch once we got to Bear Creek, and Preston told our waitress what we're up to, and I kind of expected her to like just roll her eyes at him, but no, she got all excited. And we were all just like, oh my God, stop, encouraging him. But she told us that her family had lived in that area for generations, and the stories about the encounters at the tramping ground had been passed down for like literally hundreds of years. And she was all like, the locals know that this clearing is a gateway between our living world and the supernatural realm. And she said that this stuff had been going on since the Revolutionary War. I swear, Preston was vibrating. He was so excited. And so you'd think that after all that we'd be walking into one of the most incredible places that you'd ever been. But by the time that we got there and, like parked the car, unpacked our stuff, and then took the short walk into the clearing, most of us were seriously underwhelmed. It was all just so, it was just so ordinary. I assumed a portal to hell would be, I don't know, more, just more somehow. But instead, it was just like this secluded meadow in a pine forest just off the road, smack dab in the middle of endless farmland. And Preston was the only one who didn't seem fazed. But even though it looked ordinary, right off the bat, we all realized that there was something not normal about that place. I mean, first of all, there was a gigantic dirt circle in the middle of a meadow where nothing was growing. I mean, no trees, no flowers, no grass, not even any weeds. Nothing. Preston had said on the ride over that they'd done tons of soil tests over the years, but found nothing that could explain why the soil was sterile. But I think the thing that really set the tone for the weekend, now that I'm thinking back to it, was that Bo, Drew's Aussie Shepherd, as soon as we got there, he seriously freaked out. While the rest of us began, checking out the area, looking around, he started growling and barking nonstop. And that was super unusual for him because usually he was such a chill dog. And, Drew kept calling out to him, Bo, come here, to try to get him to join the rest of us. But Bo got almost frantic. When Tom tried to pull on his leash to get him to come over with us, he just planted his feet and would not move. And like I said, it was so weird and really out of character for him. And so Drew finally gave in and tied Bo to a tree on the outside edge of the opening. And at first he was silent, but then he started making the most pitifully soft whimpering sounds. I mean, it was as if he could see or sense something that the rest of us couldn't. And so I remember we set up our tents around the circle and spent some time just settling in. And I mean, things felt weird, but given the stories that Preston had been telling us nonstop, how could they not? And so it was about mid-afternoon when Preston pulled out a Ouija board from his pack. I mean, he was definitely laying on the creepy vibe really thick. My mom had never allowed us to play with those things when we were growing up because she thought that they'd bring in evil spirits. But I just thought that it was a dumb game for gullible people, to be honest. Once we'd all gathered around him, Preston started asking questions like, "Does the devil walk here?" And his hand holding the planchette moved slowly to Y, which we took to mean yes. And so I was kind of surprised when Adelaide spoke up and asked, "Is the devil here now?" And then that's when the planchette jumped abruptly to the Y again. And I can't remember everything that we asked it that afternoon, because most of the questions were just silly, we were just messing around. Most of it had nothing to do with where we were or what we were doing. But I do remember super vividly, at one point, Drew took over planchette duty, and that was about the time that Adelaide asked if we could just stop playing the game already. But Drew's hand suddenly jerked to N for no, like he was being puppeted or something. And he literally gasped out loud, and he swore to us that he didn't move his own hand. He was freaked out, and so were all of us, honestly. And I guess that was the first moment that I really found myself doubting my convictions. Because either Drew was in on it with Preston, or something really was going on that none of us, including myself, could explain. So it was starting to get late, and while the guys made a fire, Preston finally went out and got that stupid spider plant. And so the rest of us were watching him, wondering what the hell he was up to. And he used this stick to dig up a hole at the center of the circle, and he planted the damn thing. But he said that he wanted to test the idea that nothing can grow within the circle. That's when he and Drew also ran back out to the Suburban and came back with whatever they could find. I mean, I think they got some jumper cables, a tire iron, some empty soda cans. Oh, and then they brought back this positively ancient road atlas that Drew's papa gave him. Drew said his grandfather didn't trust smartphones or anything like that. And so Preston scattered these items around the circle, and he was like, okay, now we'll test if anything left inside the circle overnight is gone the next morning. And then he did the weirdest thing of all. He pulled the biggest container of baby powder that any of us had ever seen out of his pack. And he began shaking this stuff all over the perimeter of the circle. I mean, I'd stopped asking questions at that point, but he told us that the powder was so that if any of the items in the circle got messed with overnight, then we could see the culprit's footprints. And so, we're eating dinner and we all hit the sack pretty early after that. Adelaide and I were sharing a tent, and then Drew and Preston were in another, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know exactly when I first woke up that night, but it was pitch black when I first heard something moving through the campsite. I lay there for a moment listening. I'm trying to figure out if my mind's playing tricks on me. I'd done a bunch of camping with my family up in Lake James State Park as a kid, and so I knew it wasn't unusual for local animals raccoon or deer to pay you a visit in the middle of the night. But these sounds didn't sound like an animal. This was something walking slowly and deliberately, and it was on 2 feet. I was not in the mood for Preston's games by this point, so I yelled for him to quit messing around. And then after a few seconds, Drew, who was his tent mate, hollered back that Preston was actually fast asleep beside him. And so at this point, I immediately jumped out of my tent with my flashlight, trying to catch someone in the act, but there was no one there. It was just poor Beau, still tied to his tree, whimpering away. We never found anything. Someone at one point had the good sense to check the baby powder, but there were no marks in it at all, and everything was exactly as we left it before we went to bed. I'm not sure I got much sleep after that. I think I just lay in my tent that whole night, waiting impatiently for the sun to come back up. And I admit, I was totally unprepared for what I found when it did. The circle was completely clear. The items that we'd left there the night before were scattered all around the meadow. I mean, the soda cans were crushed completely flat. A tire iron had somehow been driven into the trunk of a nearby tree. And then the jumper cables were tied up like some sort of plastic pretzel. And the road atlas had been completely shredded into paper confetti. Almost like something that comes out of one of those, the super shredders that turn everything into paper powder. That stuff was everywhere. All over the ground, around each of our tents. It looked like multicolored snow. And then the plant. The plant was dead. And not just the I'm wilty because I just got transplanted and I need some water. But I mean dead. The leaves shattered into pieces between my fingers dead. It looked as if it had dried up and died months ago. But it had literally been removed from the ground where Preston had planted it. And I couldn't even see any sign that a hole had ever been dug there. But now it was resting directly in front of Preston and Drew's tent. And no, there was not a single footprint in the baby powder. I'm not sure how long I stood there. I'm just staring at everything. I had no frame of reference for what I was seeing. And I don't know, I just felt like I was outside of my body. I only snapped out of it when Adelaide woke up and she climbed out of our tent and immediately started screaming. After that, everyone was up. Adelaide accused Preston, but he insisted he hadn't done it, and then Drew vouched for him. And I gotta say, I believed him. Preston looked genuinely shell-shocked. For the first time on our entire trip, he looked confused and scared. I think up until that point, he just thought that we were playing a fun game, and he really, deep down inside, he just expected that everything would be exactly where we left it the night before. I don't know, there was just a palpable sense of creeping dread in the air. And I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. I think it was Adelaide who said that we should all leave immediately. And Drew instantly agreed. I've never really thought of myself as a particularly brave person. So I can't really explain what happened next, but I just I heard myself say, no, I'm staying. It's not that I wasn't scared. I mean, I was terrified. But I needed to know what was going on. My rational brain just kept saying, think, there's gotta be a logical answer to this. You just need time to find it. It's not that I wanted to stay another night, but It was more like I needed to. Either there was an explanation that I was going to find, or my entire worldview had just been blown to pieces. And Preston, for, I don't know, whatever reason, God bless him, agreed to stay with me. Adelaide and Drew said there was no way that they were going to stay one more minute. And, I mean, Drew was the one who drove. So he said, if anyone was stupid enough to stay another night, they'd come back and get the rest of us in the morning. So they grabbed poor Bo and off they went. And after they left, I scoured everything. I mean, I inspected every square inch of that circle. I paced the perimeter. I walked through the woods. I was looking for any kind of clue, I even collected all of the items that we'd left in the circle, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. I just could not explain it. Honestly, I can't even really tell you what we did the rest of the day. All I know is that I shocked Preston when I marched over to my tent, yanked up all the stakes, and then dragged it into the center of the circle. Like I said, the only way that I could believe something is if I've experienced it myself. We sat around the fire until late that night. Neither of us wanted to go to sleep. I remember Preston's watch beeping and him commenting that it was midnight. And I only remember that because it was at that exact moment that we heard this unfamiliar voice behind us in the darkness say, "Hello." We both leapt to our feet like we'd just been electrocuted. And out of the darkness came what I can only describe as the most handsome man I have ever seen. I mean, he was gorgeous, impossibly beautiful. He just exuded this kind of otherworldly presence. To this day, I can't really describe it. It was kind of like being hypnotized. I remember asking him if he was from around there, and he said, "You can say that." He never explained what he was doing there, especially that late at night. And for reasons I'll never be able to explain, it never occurred to us to ask him. Preston told him that we were there to test the legend of the Devil's Tramping Ground. At that, the man smiled and said, "Of course you are." He glanced at the center of the circle where my tent was, and he let loose this huge laugh, like he knew something really funny that we didn't. He was only there for probably, a couple of minutes. But before he left, he walked over to Preston and handed him the same wooden Ouija planchette that we'd been using the night before. "I assume this belongs to you," he said. "You all have a good night. And don't forget to finish your game if you want to go home." We should have left then and there. We should have raced out of the woods, gotten onto the road, and hitchhiked our way back to town. But we didn't. I still have no idea who that man was or what he did to us, but we were suddenly overcome. Preston said he had to go to sleep, and I'll never forget it. He decided to join me and pulled his tent into the center of the circle too. I will always love him for that. Usually I never really sleep well while I'm camping. I just find it impossible to get comfortable on those useless pads. But that night, I slept straight through the night. You're not going to believe what happened next, but I swear it's true. And no, we hadn't been drinking or using anything. When I opened my eyes, I saw sky. And not like the morning light coming through the orange interior of my tent, but bright, open, blue sky. I was not in my tent anymore. I wasn't even in my sleeping bag. I sat up in this paranoid lurch and saw that I was now well outside of the circle. And so was Preston. Our tents had vanished. Everything was gone. Every single thing that we'd brought with us was gone. It was as if we just woken up and the last 2 days had been some kind of fever dream. The only thing that remained to prove the last several days actually did happen was Preston's baby powder. And this time, there were prints everywhere, as if someone had paced around the circumference of the circle again and again and again while we slept. And I say someone, but that's not even accurate because those prints were not made by a human being. They were shaped like two large, slender teardrops right next to each other. They could have easily belonged to a large deer or an elk. But it was Preston who said what I was thinking. Those look like the split hoof prints of a goat. I was suddenly hit by this, oppressive weight. I don't know, like a strong pressure in my chest, as if something incredibly powerful were pushing me away from the circle. Preston said that he felt as if something was watching us from the trees. We did not spend one more second in that clearing. Without even a word to each other, we bolted out of there and sprinted for the road. When we reached it, he had already pulled out his phone and was dialing Drew to come pick us up. I've never been back to the Devil's Tramping Grounds, and I never will. I have no idea what or who we encountered that night, but I know that I can't explain it, and neither can science. The last thing I saw as we pulled away will haunt me for the rest of my life. I mean, years later, it's still a recurring nightmare. As Drew hit the gas, I saw a massive, dark, shadowy figure with yellow eyes watching us from the trees. And the laughter. Oh my God, that laughter. The exact same we'd heard from our mysterious visitor the night before, just echoing through the trees.
The Devil's Tramping Ground remains one of North Carolina's most intriguing and mysterious spots. But if you want to visit, you'll need to get permission from the landowners, who will allow you to camp for a small fee. As for what to do if you bump into a handsome devil, well, that's on you. In our next episode, we'll go inside haunted places where ghosts are literally begging to be seen.
As my friend and I were trying to debate where we were going to put this very large bookshelf that weighed a ton, my friend said, well, why don't we just put it in the old funeral parlor? And as soon as he said that, we heard these two loud knocks come from that room. I checked to see if there was anyone in the old funeral parlor. There was no one in there, which further led to, us being frightened and saying, well, maybe we need to get out of here until the daylight comes.
To learn more about the paranormal places and scary stories of North Carolina, visit ncfirstandfright.com. Discover trails and destinations that will haunt you in the best way, and share your own NC scare by tagging hashtag #NCFirstInFright. First in Fright is a production of Visit North Carolina, Luke Wire, and AYR Media. Hosted by me, Cooper Thornton. Executive producers Katie Bailey and Dana Grimstead for Visit North Carolina. Executive producers Nancy Landisberg, Michael Ashley, and Ryan Coleman for Luke Wire. Executive producer Eliza Rosen for AYR Media. Produced and written by Brandon Phibbs. Edited and mixed by Cameron Taggy. Casting producer Danielle Hillenbrand. AYR Media Coordinator, Andy Levine. Voices by North Carolina storyteller Alexis Dumaine.